There's a place in Tasmania where the ground doesn't just open, it collapses into the deepest known cave system in Australia. Not a crack and not a sinkhole you can peer into and forget about, but a vertical descent that keeps going long after your instincts say it should stop. On a continent defined by flat horizons and ancient, worn-down landscapes, that shouldn't exist. And yet, hidden beneath dense rainforest and thick mountain soils, it does. Because under the surface, something far more aggressive has been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. Water doesn't linger here, it disappears. Rainfall seeps through the forest floor, finds fractures in limestone, and vanishes into a subterranean network that doesn't spread gently outward, but drives sharply downward. The result is a system that doesn't just meander underground, it plunges. From the entrance to its lowest known point, the drop approaches 400 metres. That's not just deep for Australia, it's an outright anomaly. To understand why this exists at all, you have to start with the rock. The cave sits within the Junee Florentine karst, a region built from thick sequences of Ordovician limestone. Unlike much of mainland Australia where limestone is patchy or thin, this is a continuous, deeply fractured carbonate system, perfect for water to exploit. Over time, slightly acidic rainwater begins dissolving that limestone along joints and bedding planes. At first, the changes are microscopic, but given enough time, those pathways widen, link together, and eventually form conduits large enough to swallow entire streams. And here, the streams don't just flow, they fall. What makes this system different isn't just the presence of limestone, it's the elevation and climate working together. The cave begins high on the slopes near Mount Field, where rainfall is intense and persistent. That elevation difference between the surface and regional base level creates a strong hydraulic gradient. Water isn't just trickling through rock, it's being pulled downward with force. Every storm, every melt event, every period of heavy rainfall adds energy to the system, and that energy translates directly into erosion. Instead of forming wide, horizontal passages like many classic caves, this one develops vertically. Shafts open, passages collapse and reform, water cuts downward through vadose zones, carving steep canyons and drops. Over time, a staircase of vertical segments forms, each one linking to the next, creating a continuous descent that feels more like a geological elevator shaft than a cave. That's how Niggly Cave becomes what it is, the deepest known cave system in Australia. But the depth alone isn't the most interesting part, it's what the depth preserves. Inside the cave there are places where the past is still sitting exactly where it was left. High above the current stream level, you find rounded cobbles, river stones that clearly didn't form where they now sit. They're too large for the modern water flow to move, and they're stranded in positions that only make sense if the cave once carried far more powerful streams. In some sections, these gravels are cemented beneath flowstone, thin sheets of calcite that formed when water flow slowed or stopped entirely. That tells you something critical. The cave hasn't evolved in a straight line. It's been through cycles, periods of intense flow, followed by stagnation, followed by reactivation. At times, sediment filled entire passages, choking the system. Then conditions changed, water returned, and those sediments were flushed out again, leaving behind fragments of the past stuck to the ceiling or walls. Some of those deposits are incredibly old. Dating of speleothems associated with these sediments shows that parts of the system, and the materials within it, are older than 350,000 years. That pushes its development well back into the mid-Pleistocene, a time when climates were shifting dramatically between glacial and interglacial states. And that's where things get even more interesting. During colder periods, Tasmania's highlands experienced periglacial conditions. Freeze-thaw cycles destabilise slopes, generating massive amounts of loose material, dolerite-rich gravels and debris that could be mobilised during melt events. When that material reached sink points feeding the cave, it didn't just trickle in, it surged. High-energy flows carried cobbles and even boulders deep into the system, depositing them in passages that are now completely inactive. Then, as conditions warmed, the system changed again. Water flow became less violent, more stable. Instead of transporting sediment, it began depositing calcite. Flowstone formed over the gravels, sealing them in place. In some areas, entire false floors developed, calcite layers suspended above the original streambed, with voids beneath where sediment had been washed away. Eventually, the cycle would repeat. A new phase of erosion would cut through these deposits, reopen pathways, and push the system deeper still. What you end up with is not just a cave, but a layered record of environmental change. Each sediment deposit, each calcite layer, and each abandoned passage tells you something about how the system behaved at a specific point in time. It's a vertical archive, recording shifts in climate, hydrology, and landscape evolution over hundreds of thousands of years, and all of it is hidden. From this surface, there's almost no indication of what lies beneath. The entrance doesn't advertise its depth. The surrounding landscape looks like typical Tasmanian forest. Dense vegetation, wet soils, nothing unusual. You could walk past it without ever realising that one of the most extreme vertical systems in the country is directly below your feet. That disconnect is part of why it's so rarely talked about. Australia's geological identity is tied to its age and stability. It's a continent that's been eroding for hundreds of millions of years, losing elevation and smoothing out relief. Compared to the tectonically active regions of Europe or Asia, it lacks the dramatic uplift needed to drive the formation of ultra-deep cave systems. But Tasmania is different. Here, you have a combination of factors that briefly recreate the conditions needed for depth. Thick limestone provides the raw material, high rainfall supplies the water, and elevation, modest by global standards but significant in an Australian context, creates the gradient needed to drive vertical erosion. It's not enough to produce kilometre-deep caves like those found in Georgia or Slovenia, but it's enough to push beyond anything else on the continent. And that's why this system matters. It breaks the rule. It shows that even in a landscape defined by stability, there are pockets where dynamic processes still dominate, where water can carve aggressively, where systems can evolve rapidly, and where depth, true vertical depth, can still be achieved. But it also highlights something else. Depth isn't everything. Globally, a 375 to 400 metre cave is relatively modest. There are systems more than 5 times deeper, but those systems are often geologically young, formed in regions where tectonic uplift is ongoing. They're dramatic, but they don't always preserve long-term records. This one does. Because it exists in a relatively stable setting, it hasn't been destroyed or overprinted by rapid geological change. Instead, it's been modified gradually, allowing older features to survive alongside newer ones. That's why you can find sediments older than 350,000 years still sitting inside it. That's why you can trace multiple phases of activity within a single system. It's not just deep, it's persistent. And that persistence is what makes it valuable, not just as a curiosity, but as a scientific record. Every layer of sediment, every calcite deposit, and every abandoned passage contributes to a broader understanding of how karst systems respond to changing conditions over long timescales. Which brings you back to the surface, because everything that happens inside the cave is ultimately driven by what happens above it. Rainfall patterns, vegetation cover, temperature fluctuations, even events like fires and landslides. They all influence how water enters the system, how much energy it carries, and what it does once it's underground. At times, those surface processes can even shut the system down entirely. Blocked sink points can divert water elsewhere, starving parts of the cave of flow. Sediment can accumulate, sealing passages and halting erosion. Then, when conditions shift again, water finds a way back in, reactivating old pathways or carving new ones. That constant feedback between surface and subsurface is what keeps the system evolving. Even now, it's not finished. Exploration is still ongoing. There are passages that haven't been fully mapped, connections that haven't been confirmed, depths that may yet be extended. The number we have today, around 375 metres, is based on what's currently known. But caves like this rarely give up all their secrets at once. There's always the possibility that it goes deeper. And if it does, it won't be because of something new formed overnight. It will be because something old was finally discovered. Another segment of a system that's been developing quietly, out of sight, for hundreds of thousands of years. That's the strange thing about it. Australia's deepest cave system isn't a dramatic, newly formed feature. It's ancient, subtle, and hidden. The result of processes that have been operating for far longer than anyone has been looking for them. I hope you found this as interesting as I did. And as always, thanks for watching. Before I end this video, I'd like to give a big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you so much to everyone that helps to support this channel.